Hello, nice to see you back at our webinar series. Today I want to talk about some quite hot topic, ITP, Intelligent Tracking Prevention in browsers and OS systems, and how you can cope with it with using next to client-side tracking, also server-side tracking. So here I made a small diagram. So we have a customer comes to a website, let's say shop.com, and on the website there's a tag manager, and in this one we have some tracking scripts. And this one will fire what's called like client-side, so CST, tracking to a cloud collector. So here we usually have already for our clients that everyone has every client has their individual tracking domains. For example, here it would be called for example, tracking.shop.com. But still everything here happens actually in the browser of the customer. So here is potential some ITP happening so that the browser or the OS is preventing the tracking. So what is actually but really in the whole setup of the web traffic is you have from the web client, from the customer, you also have the web server. So every page in the browser has some communication with some web server. And when we talk about server-side tracking, then it's the tracking events are straight fired from the web server into the cloud collector. And both communicate over the TCP/IP protocol, and that's also every web page requests at web server what needs to be displayed, and therefore we have some communication between both of them. So actually, what do we have now? So we have that the tag manager here, our tracking scripts, they try to set a cookie or have a user ID which puts into the client-side tracking. Let's say we have here user XYZ. And this is fired up, XYZ. The server-side tracking is first of all separate. So we will have that as our client-side tracking. From the server-side tracking, we have our own server-side user ID, and it's called ABC. So we have here the ABC user ID, and that is fired here, ABC. So first of all, we would not be able to put both together. So we have here some tracking, the client side with XYZ, and here we have some different trackings. You know, it's like a server side, this is client side, and this gives us a user ID ABC. Now the problem, of course, how to make the handshake, how to know that both of these events actually belong to the same user. And here we use something that every time when this page communicates with web server, it also uploads or gives us all the cookies which are belonging to this domain. And here we will give up the information of our client-side user ID, the XYZ, will get to the web server, likely not with the first page view, but then with the second or third page view, and then we can add into this tracking call also XYZ. And therefore, we know then here plus XYZ. We know then at some point that both cookies belong, both user IDs belong together, and that the events coming from here, this server side and this client side, are actually telling us more about the same user. Because that's actually what we want with tracking. So to put it maybe more on this perspective, what do we want? So we have, let's say we're here on the 5th of July. And from the customer comes to the site, so we have events in the client-side tracking with the user ID XYZ, and with the client-side, with the server-side user ID ABC. And let's say the customer will come back on, let's say on the 7th of July. And here we have, but because it's 2 days later, ITP might force a refresh of the cookie. So force this XYZ cookie is deleted. So when the customer comes back, he has a new ID, and it says it's YXA. So with the ABC, the server-side user actually stays. Quite often, I will later come to some statistics, but with this one we know this one stays here, and so we can see the same user coming back again. And then maybe even, let's say, on the 15th of July, here it will refresh the cookie again. So let's say it's like YWV, but our server side user ID stays the same, and that's ABC. And therefore, we have the full understanding that we're always talking about the same customer. Because if we would rely only on the client-side tracking data, we would think that we have here one customer, here's a different customer, and here's another customer coming back. And the server-side tracking helps us to identify that actually all of them is one customer. Okay, let's look at some statistics of what we saw at some clients who rolled out server-side tracking at the moment. Just a brief summary. So here we have the web browser where the user views the web page. Then we have the web server. Here we have the server-side tracking. Here is the client-side tracking. Ideally, we have here a client-side user ID, so the XYZ, a cookie set. And here we have an ABC, a server-side user ID, and at some point from the second or third page view, we also know in the server side the client-side user ID. Okay, so so actually here is potential impact of ITP, and that's the question: what is actually the ITP impact? We measure this by taking the server-side tracking data, and this is always happening, and compare it what we see in kind of like user behavior in the client-side data. Okay, so what do we see? Actually, we see like 3 different issues. The first is like CST, so the server-side, the client-side tracking is completely blocked. So this means like the client side is nothing is happening. It could be ITP, that could be also some ad blockers, or it could be like something crashes in the browser. And this case, so we only have the server-side tracking. In this, we have like in 2 to 3% of the cases in the world of iOS and Mac. And we have this in the world of Windows and Android, which behave quite similar. We have this in 5 to 6% of the cases. The second issue, or like what we saw, actually is quite interesting. We have that the cookie is set, so we have a client-side user ID, but we have no tracking. So we have no client-side tracking. So we get this user ID, the client-side user ID, over the server-side tracking, but not over the client-side tracking. So we have like CST cookie set, no tracking. And this is actually happening in 3 to 5% of the cases in the iOS and Mac world, and even 5 to 7% in the Android and Windows world. The last situation, what we saw in the data, is actually the most interesting and I think the most impactful. That is that the CST is fully running. So we always have a tracking, we also have a cookie here, but the cookie IDs get refreshed. So what it means with this one, so we track for the same server side ABC user ID, we track not just the XYZ, but we track also on a different day YWV user. So we have like 2 or more client-side user IDs for the same server-side user ID. So this is refreshing. So the CST user ID gets refreshed. And this is actually happening, what we see, all to this disclaimer, this is everything with the stats what we see at the moment, with the current version, with the current browser mix. This what we see roughly like 13 till 15% in all traffic. But we see it 30 till 50% in 3+ days user. So when we saw from the server side tracking the user 3 or more days, then we see this in 30 to 50% of the cases. For the all traffic, but here of course you have a lot of users also which are coming like only once or twice. then of course in the total one it's only like 13 to 15%. Interesting wise, this is not at all an issue on the Windows and Android world at the moment. So if we make our button line here, so kind of like the effectiveness by ITP, it's 20% all traffic, but up to 50+% or for return user. And for the Windows and Android world, it's around about 11%. So you see, it's kind of interesting to be aware of it, that ITP and also other tracking prevention software is affecting the client-side tracking a lot. Most of the cases actually that the tracking, the interesting wise, the tracking goes more often through in the iOS and Apple world, so it's less often really blocked. That is actually an issue in Windows and Android. But here we have the big issue of refreshing user IDs. So here it's really when you rely only on your client-side data, you need to be aware that what you see as a new user might not be a new user. So we really recommend to implement something like a server-side tracking to have a better understanding what really makes a user and also see returning users better coming back. Thanks for listening. I hope you find it interesting. Yes, this ITP is kind of a hot topic at the moment, and here that were our results, what we see now, right now at the moment, when we compared like server-side tracking results with client-side tracking results for our clients. If you have questions for this, please contact us. I think it's very important to have like good understanding of your data collection in order to build any good customer journeys and therefore to do some smart attribution. In case of questions, just email us and we are happy to talk. Okay, thanks a lot and ciao, bis bald.